Sometimes the people who love you most are the first to abandon you. Helga learned this bitter truth the day her own family cast her out, calling her a burden too heavy to carry. In the harsh village of Fjallheim, she stands alone in the cold square. Her mother is gone, her brothers have sailed away, and cruel whispers follow her everywhere. She holds a small bundle close, ready to walk into the wilderness and disappear forever. But then Brandr Ironjaw appears. This giant warrior is known throughout the land for his strength and merciless nature. Everyone fears him. Yet when he sees Helga, something changes in his eyes. He steps forward, places his hand on her shoulder, and tells the shocked villagers, "She is mine." Nobody knows why the mighty warrior would claim a woman the world has rejected. What secret does Helga carry that will change both their lives forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The wind carried the scent of pine and snow across the village of Fjallheim, where wooden longhouses huddled together like old friends, sharing warmth against the coming winter. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, painting grey ribbons against the pale morning sky. This was a place where survival depended on strength, where the weak found no mercy, and where a person's worth was measured by what they could contribute to the clan's prosperity. Helga had learned these harsh truths over 28 winters of life. She stood now in the shadow of her family's longhouse, watching her brothers Gunnar and Olaf load their ship with provisions. Their movements were quick and efficient, born from years of raiding and trading across the northern seas. Neither man looked in her direction, though she knew they felt her presence like a weight they could no longer bear. "You cannot expect us to care for you through another winter," Gunnar had said the night before, his weathered face hard as the iron he forged. "Mother is dead. The responsibility ends with her." The words had cut deeper than any blade. Helga remembered how different things had been when her mother Astrid still drew breath. The older woman had possessed a gentleness that seemed impossible in their brutal world, along with knowledge of herbs and healing that made her invaluable to the community. She had protected Helga from the worst of the village's cruelty, shielding her daughter behind a wall of useful skills and quiet dignity. But Astrid's cough had grown worse through the last winter, her body finally succumbing to the lung sickness that claimed so many in their harsh climate. With her death, Helga had lost not only a mother, but her only defender in a world that valued nothing she could offer. The bundle in her arms felt heavy, wrapped in her mother's old woolen cloak. Inside were the few possessions Astrid had pressed into her hands during those final fevered days. Clothing mostly, and what appeared to be scraps of old parchment covered in faded markings. Her mother had whispered something about keeping them safe, about their importance, but the words had been lost in delirium and grief. "Look at her." Standing there like a lost sheep, came a voice from behind. Helga didn't need to turn to know it belonged to Sigrid, the blacksmith's wife, whose tongue was sharper than her husband's best blade. "No man will ever want such a burden. Better she disappears before the snows come." Other women's voices joined in, weaving together a tapestry of casual cruelty that had become as familiar as breathing. They spoke as if Helga couldn't hear, as if her presence meant nothing. In their world, perhaps it didn't. The sound of heavy boots on wooden planks announced the approach of someone whose presence commanded a different kind of attention. The women's chatter died instantly, replaced by the respectful silence that always accompanied Brandr Ironjaw's arrival anywhere in the village. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry a full-grown man. His hair was the color of burnished copper, braided with small bones and metal rings that caught the morning light. Scars crisscrossed his arms and hands like a map of every battle he had survived, and his war hammer hung at his side with the casual ease of a walking stick. But it was his eyes that truly set him apart, pale blue like winter ice and just as unforgiving. Men had died simply for meeting his gaze with insufficient respect. His reputation stretched across every settlement in the northern fjords, where stories of his victories grew with each telling. He had single-handedly held a mountain pass against 50 raiders. He had crushed a rival chieftain's skull with his bare hands during a dispute over fishing rights. He had never shown mercy to an enemy, never backed down from a challenge, never displayed what lesser men might call weakness. Yet something in those ice-cold eyes softened as they fell upon Helga. She felt his gaze like warmth from a hearth fire, unexpected and overwhelming. For the first time in months, someone was truly seeing her not as a burden to be discarded or a problem to be solved, but as a person worthy of attention. Her heart hammered against her ribs as he approached, each step deliberate and measured. Helga, Astrid's daughter. His voice rumbled like distant thunder, carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You will come with me." The words weren't a request. They weren't even a command, exactly, but rather a statement of fact, as immutable as the changing of seasons. Around them, the villagers who had gathered to witness Helga's final humiliation now stood in shocked silence. Brandr, Elder Ragnar, stepped forward, his weathered hands gripping a walking staff carved with protective runes. "The woman has no family to speak for her, no dowry to offer. Surely there are better choices. She is mine." Brandr's declaration cut through the old man's words like an axe through timber. He placed one massive hand on Helga's shoulder, and she felt the warmth of his palm through the thin fabric of her dress. "Any who dispute this will answer to me." The threat hung in the air like morning mist, palpable and impossible to ignore. No one in Fjallheim was foolish enough to challenge Brandr Ironjaw over anything, let alone something he clearly considered a settled matter. Helga found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "Why?" He looked down at her, and for a moment something almost gentle flickered across his features. "Because you deserve better than what they would give you." The simple honesty of it nearly broke her composure. When had anyone last considered what she deserved? When had anyone looked at her and seen something worth protecting rather than discarding? "Gather your things," he continued, his tone returning to its usual commanding timbre. "You'll have no need of sleeping rough when my hall has empty beds and full stores for winter." As Helga clutched her bundle tighter, she caught sight of her brothers loading the last of their supplies. They moved with renewed urgency now, eager to be gone before anyone could suggest they reconsider their abandonment of their sister. The cowardice of it struck her like a physical blow, but beneath the hurt lay something unexpected. Relief. "I have nothing else," she admitted, indicating the small bundle in her arms. "This is everything." Brandr's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only sign of anger at her family's callousness. "Then we go." His hall stood at the highest point of the village, built from massive logs that had taken dozens of men to position. Carved dragons' heads adorned the roofline, their mouths open in eternal roars that seemed to challenge the very sky. Inside, the main room stretched longer than most complete. Houses, with a central fire pit surrounded by heavy wooden tables and benches that could seat a small army. Weapons lined the walls, swords, axes, spears and shields, each one bearing the marks of real combat. But it was the warhammer mounted above the great chair that drew the eye. The handle was wrapped in worn leather, darkened by years of gripping hands, while the head bore intricate engravings that seemed to shift in the firelight. "That belonged to my father," Brandr said, noticing her gaze, "and his father before him. 3 generations of Ironjaws have carried it into battle." "It's magnificent," Helga whispered, meaning every word. The weapon radiated a sense of history and power that made her feel small by comparison. "Weapons are tools, nothing more," he replied, but she caught the note of pride in his voice. "A man's worth isn't in what he carries, but in how he chooses to use what he has." The statement felt loaded with meaning she didn't fully understand, but before she could respond, the hall's main door swung open. A man slightly shorter than Brandr but built like a tree trunk entered, his dark hair streaked with premature silver. This had to be Eirik, Brandr's second-in-command and closest friend. "So the rumors are true." Eirik said, his sharp eyes moving between Brandr and Helga. The great Ironjaw has claimed himself a woman. Careful, old friend, Brandr's voice carried warning. She is under my protection. Eirik raised both hands in a gesture of peace, but his expression remained skeptical. I meant no disrespect. I'm simply curious what prompted such a sudden decision. Sometimes the right choice is obvious, Brandr replied, moving to pour mead from a large pitcher into carved wooden cups. Helga will have the chamber beside the stores. See that she has everything she needs. As the two men continued their conversation in low tones, Helga found herself studying the details of her new surroundings. Thick furs covered the floors, and the walls bore painted scenes of great battles and mythical creatures. But it was the smaller touches that struck her most: the carefully maintained weapons, the quality of the furniture, the abundance of food stores visible through an open doorway. This was the hall of a man who planned for the future, who understood that survival required more than just strength. It spoke to a thoughtfulness she wouldn't have expected from someone with Brandr's fearsome reputation. "You're wondering if you made the right choice," Eirik said quietly, appearing beside her while Brandr checked something in the stores. "I didn't make any choice," Helga replied honestly. "He simply claimed me, and I had nowhere else to go." Brandr doesn't do anything without reason, even when that reason isn't immediately clear. The older man studied her with intelligent brown eyes. "But he also doesn't often explain himself. You'll need patience to understand him." "I have time," she said then, paused. "At least I hope I do." Eirik's expression softened slightly. "You do. Brandr has many faults, but breaking his word isn't among them. If he says you're under his protection, then you are. The question becomes what you plan to do with that safety." Before Helga could formulate an answer, Brandr returned with a cup of warm mead and a bowl of thick stew. The food smelled better than anything she'd eaten in months, rich with meat and vegetables that spoke of careful provisioning. "Eat," he commanded gently. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal since the summer." The observation was accurate enough to sting. Food had grown scarce in her family's house as her mother's illness progressed, and what little there was had gone to the men who contributed labor and income. Helga had grown accustomed to hunger as a constant companion, but as she ate, savoring each spoonful of the hearty stew, she found herself studying Brandr when she thought he wasn't looking. His movements were economical and graceful despite his size, and his attention to detail was evident in everything, from the way he maintained his weapons to how he organized his stores. This was not the mindless brute she had expected based on the stories told about him. This was a man who thought carefully about his decisions and planned for consequences. The realization both comforted and worried her in equal measure. As the afternoon wore on and she settled into the rhythm of the hall, one question continued to nag at her thoughts. Of all the women in Fjallheim and the surrounding settlements, why had he chosen her? What had he seen in that moment in the village square that prompted such an immediate and absolute declaration? The answer, she suspected, lay somewhere in the careful way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, and in the unexpected gentleness he showed when dealing with someone the rest of the world considered worthless. But understanding Brandr Ironjaw, she was beginning to realize, would require more than simple observation. It would require trust, something that had been in short supply in her life for far too long. 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt almost like peace. Helga woke each morning to the sound of Brandr moving about the hall, preparing for his daily duties as the village's unofficial protector and leader. She helped where she could, mending torn clothing, organizing stores, preparing meals, small tasks that felt significant after months of being told she contributed nothing of value. But it was during the quiet evening hours, when the fire burned low and shadows danced across the carved walls, that she found herself thinking about her mother's final words. Astrid had gripped her hand with surprising strength for someone so near death, her eyes bright with fever, but also something else, urgency perhaps, or fear. "The bundle, Helga," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the crackling flames. "Keep it safe. The map of the ancients. It must not fall into the wrong hands." At the time, Helga had assumed the illness had taken her mother's reason. What map could possibly be hidden among old clothes and scraps of parchment? But as the days passed in Brandr's hall, the memory gnawed at her with increasing persistence. On the fourth evening, as Brandr sat sharpening his weapons and Eirik had gone to check the village perimeter, Helga finally found the courage to examine her mother's belongings more carefully. She spread the contents of the bundle across her sleeping furs, handling each item with the reverence due to the last remnants of a life. Most of it was exactly what she had expected: worn clothing, a bone comb, a small eating knife with a carved handle. But wrapped in a piece of soft leather at the very bottom lay something that made her breath catch in her throat. The parchment was old, far older than anything else in the bundle. The edges were yellowed and brittle, and strange markings covered its surface in faded ink. But as Helga studied the symbols by the light of an oil lamp, recognition began to dawn. These weren't random scratches or decorative flourishes. They were runes, ancient runes that predated the common script used in their village by generations. Her mother had taught her to read the old writing during quiet winter evenings, claiming it was important to understand the heritage of their people. Helga had assumed it was simply a way to pass time, but as she traced the symbols with trembling fingers, their meaning began to emerge like shapes in morning fog. This was indeed a map, but not just any map. It was a guide to something called the Hall of Queen Astrid's Tears, a location marked with symbols that suggested great treasure and equally great danger. The parchment showed a route through mountain passes and ancient forests, with landmarks described in the formal language of royal scribes. "Mother of Thor," she breathed, the magnitude of the discovery hitting her like a physical blow. Her mother hadn't been delirious after all. She had been trying to share something of immense importance, something she had kept hidden, for reasons Helga was only beginning to understand. The soft sound of footsteps on the wooden floor announced Brandr's approach. Helga's first instinct was to hide the map, but something in his steady gaze made her pause. If he had truly claimed her as his responsibility, perhaps he deserved to know what burdens came with that decision. "What troubles you?" he asked, settling beside her with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own space. His eyes moved to the spread contents of the bundle, taking in the careful way she had arranged everything. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." "Perhaps I have," Helga replied, holding up the parchment with hands that shook slightly. "My mother left me this. I thought it was nothing, just old papers, but—" She gestured helplessly at the garn. "Intricate markings. Can you read the ancient script?" Brandr leaned closer, his massive frame radiating warmth as he studied the document. His brow furrowed in concentration, and she caught the scent of leather and steel that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. "Some," he admitted, pointing to several symbols. "My grandfather insisted I learn the old ways, though I was never as skilled as he hoped." He paused, his finger hovering over a particular sequence of runes. "But this speaks of Queen Astrid, the lost queen of the northern clans." "Lost? A legend from 3 generations past," Brandr explained, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a practiced storyteller. "They say she ruled when the clans were united, when there was peace between the settlements and prosperity for all. But she vanished during a great winter, taking with her the royal treasures that had been gathered over centuries. Some claimed she was murdered by rivals. Others believed she hid the treasures to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands." Helga felt the blood drain from her face. "My mother was named Astrid. A common name, honoring the lost queen," Brandr said gently, but his eyes had sharpened with interest. "Many families chose it, hoping to invoke her blessing." He returned his attention to the map, tracing the route with one scarred finger. "But if this is authentic, it suggests the treasure was never lost, merely hidden." You believe it's real?" Before Brandr could answer, the hall's main door burst open. Eirik strode in, his face grim and his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. "We have visitors," he announced without preamble. "Magnus Bloodaxe's men, flying the red banner. They're demanding an audience." The name sent a chill through Helga. Even she, isolated as she had been, knew of Magnus Bloodaxe and his clan's reputation for ruthless expansion. They controlled 3 settlements to the north and were known for their brutal taxation of smaller communities. Brandr was already moving, rolling up the map with careful precision before tucking it inside his tunic. "How many?" "6 warriors, but well-armed and mounted," Eirik replied. "They've made camp just outside our borders, close enough to be a threat, but not quite close enough to justify an immediate response." "They're testing us," Brandr said grimly. "Seeing how we react to pressure." He turned to Helga, his expression serious. "Say nothing of what we've discussed. If Magnus learns of this map's existence, he'll take it by force." The implications struck her immediately. A treasure significant enough to attract Magnus Bloodaxe's attention would be worth killing for. Suddenly, the quiet safety she had begun to feel in Brandr's hall seemed fragile as morning frost. "What do they want?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The same thing all strong men want from those they perceive as weak," Brandr replied, checking his weapons with the automatic gestures of a lifetime warrior. "Submission, tribute, and the knowledge that they can take whatever they please whenever they choose." Eirik nodded grimly. The messenger specifically mentioned the village's recent changes. They know about Helga, and they're curious why the great Brandr Ironjaw would claim a woman with no obvious value. The words stung, but Helga had long since grown accustomed to such assessments of her worth. What worried her more was the calculating look in Brandr's eyes as he considered the implications. "They suspect something," she realized aloud. "They think you claiming me means I have some hidden value." "Perhaps," Brandr admitted. "Or perhaps they simply see an opportunity to humiliate someone they view as a potential rival." He moved to the wall where his father's war hammer hung, lifting it with reverent care. "Either way, they'll learn that some things cannot be taken by force." As he prepared to meet with Magnus's representatives, Helga found herself clutching the edge of her cloak, where the map now rested, carefully hidden beneath the fabric. In the span of a single evening, she had gone from being merely a burden to being someone whose secrets could reshape the balance of power between the clans. The realization was both terrifying and oddly empowering. For the first time in her life, she possessed something of real value, something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth the risks that would inevitably come. "Whatever happens," Brandr said quietly, pausing at the door, "remember that you are under my protection. No matter what they say or threaten, you are mine to defend." The fierce certainty in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and watched as he strode out into the gathering darkness to face whatever challenge Magnus Bloodaxe's men would bring. But even as she admired his courage, a nagging voice in the back of her mind whispered that some challenges were too great for even the strongest warrior to overcome alone. The map hidden against her heart felt heavier with each passing moment, as if the weight of ancient secrets was finally making itself known. The confrontation with Magnus Bloodaxe's men had lasted well into the night, their voices carrying across the village like the growls of circling wolves. Helga had remained in the hall as instructed, but sleep had proven impossible. Every raised voice, every scrape of weapons, every moment of tense silence had set her nerves on edge like bowstrings drawn too tight. When Brandr finally returned, his face was carved from stone and his knuckles bore fresh scrapes. He moved with the careful control of a man holding back tremendous anger, each step measured and deliberate. "What did they want?" Helga asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. "Tribute," he replied curtly, moving to pour himself a cup of mead with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Magnus claims our village falls under his protection now, and protection requires payment. And you refused. I told them what I tell all men who mistake me for easy prey. Brandr's smile held no warmth whatsoever. That they're welcome to try taking what they want by force, but they should be prepared for the consequences. The casual way he spoke of violence should have frightened her, but instead Helga found herself oddly comforted. In her experience, men who spoke loudest about their strength were often the ones who possessed the least of it. Brandr's quiet confidence suggested reserves of power that ran deeper than mere bluster. They asked about you specifically, he continued, settling into his great chair with a heavy sigh. They wanted to know why I would claim a woman with no family connections, no wealth, no obvious skills. His ice-blue eyes fixed on hers. I told them my reasons were my own. The weight of the hidden map pressed against Helga's ribs, like a guilty secret. Do you think they suspected that you carry something of value? Possibly. Brandr leaned forward, his massive frame somehow managing to convey both strength and weariness. Magnus isn't a fool, whatever else his faults might be. He knows I don't make decisions lightly. Over the following days, as autumn deepened toward winter, Helga found herself spending more time studying the ancient map. Each examination revealed new details, landmarks described in archaic language, warnings about dangers both natural and supernatural, and most intriguingly, references to a series of standing stones that would guide travelers to their destination. The rune stones, according to her mother's careful notations in the margins, were ancient markers placed by the original builders of Queen Astrid's treasure hall. Each one contained a riddle that had to be solved before the next stone could be located. It was an elaborate security system designed to prevent casual treasure seekers from stumbling upon the royal hoard. But as Helga traced the symbols with growing familiarity, she began to notice something that made her blood run cold. Her mother hadn't simply copied these riddles from some other source. She had annotated them, added clarifications, corrected apparent errors in translation. This was the work of someone who had intimate knowledge of the ancient queen's methods. "You're troubled again," Brandr observed one evening, finding her hunched over the map by lamplight. "You've worn a furrow in your brow from concentrating so hard. The more I study this, the more questions I have," she admitted, gesturing to the carefully drawn route. "My mother knew specific things about Queen Astrid's treasure that she could only have learned from." She trailed off, the implications too enormous to voice. "From family knowledge passed down through generations," Brandr finished quietly. He settled beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his massive frame. "You're beginning to suspect your mother's connection to the lost queen was more than simple admiration." "It seems impossible," Helga whispered. "We were nobody, poor farmers struggling to survive each winter. How could we be connected to royalty?" "Royal bloodlines have a way of surviving, even when the kingdoms that created them have crumbled to dust," Brandr replied thoughtfully. "Sometimes the wisest course is to disappear entirely, to blend in among common folk until the time comes to reclaim what was lost." The possibility sent shivers down her spine. To think that she, plain, unremarkable, Helga, might carry the blood of ancient queens seemed like the stuff of children's stories. Yet the evidence was mounting with each careful examination of her mother's notes. "Even if it's true," she said finally, "what difference does it make? I can't exactly march into Magnus Bloodaxe's hall and declare myself royalty." "Can't you?" Brandr's tone was thoughtful, speculative. "If this map is authentic, if the treasure truly exists, then proving your heritage might be exactly what these lands need." Before Helga could respond, Eirik entered the hall with his usual economy of motion. But tonight his expression carried an urgency that immediately commanded attention. "Magnus's scouts have been seen near the old mountain passes," he reported without preamble. "3 different groups, all moving north toward the ancient roads." Brandr was on his feet instantly, his warrior instincts taking over. "He's searching for something." Or someone told him where to look, Eirik replied grimly. His gaze moved to Helga, not accusingly but with obvious concern. Word travels fast in small villages. If someone overheard discussions about ancient treasures, no one could have overheard anything. Helga interrupted, but even as she spoke, doubt crept into her voice. Had she been careful enough? Had someone seen her studying the map? We've been discreet. Discretion isn't the same as secrecy, Brandr said quietly, and Magnus has gold enough to loosen tongues that might otherwise stay silent. The realization that her presence, her very existence, might have put the entire village at risk settled over Helga like a burial shroud. She had gone from being a burden no one wanted to being a danger no one could afford. "I should leave," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Take the map and disappear before Magnus connects it to your village. You've done enough for me already. You will do no such thing." The steel in Brandr's voice cut through her rising panic like a blade through cloth. "I claimed you before witnesses, gave you my protection before the entire village. Breaking that bond now would destroy my reputation and accomplish nothing. But if staying puts everyone in danger, then we face that danger together," he said firmly. "You forget that I am not some soft merchant or aging farmer. I am Brandr Ironjaw, and men cross me at their own peril." The fierce certainty in his voice sent warmth spreading through her chest, but it did nothing to ease the practical concerns racing through her mind. Magnus commanded hundreds of warriors. Even Brandr's legendary skill had its limits. "There is another option," Eirik said slowly, as if weighing each word carefully. "If the treasure exists, if it's as significant as the legends suggest, then perhaps the solution isn't to hide from Magnus, but to reach it before he does." "You're suggesting we follow the map ourselves," Helga realized. "I'm suggesting," Eirik replied carefully, "that sometimes the best defense is to seize the initiative. Magnus may have numbers, but we have something he lacks, the actual map to the treasure." Brandr was quiet for a long moment, his sharp mind clearly working through the implications. Finally, he spoke. "Winter is almost upon us. The mountain passes will become impassable soon, which means we would have to move quickly." His gaze fixed on Helga. "But the decision isn't mine alone to make. The map belongs to you, and with it, the choice of what to do." The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. Everything that happened from this moment forward would stem from her decision. The safety of the village, the lives of the people she was coming to care about, the future of whatever legacy her mother had tried to preserve, all of it rested on her next words. She looked down at the map spread before them, its ancient symbols seeming to pulse with secrets in the flickering lamplight. Then she lifted her eyes to meet Brandr's steady gaze. "When do we leave?" The decision to pursue Queen Astrid's treasure had transformed the hall from a place of quiet refuge into a hub of urgent activity. Helga watched in fascination as Brandr and Eirik moved with the practiced efficiency of men who had prepared for dangerous journeys many times before. But it was during the quiet moments between preparations that she discovered the depth of complexity hidden beneath Brandr's fearsome reputation. On the second evening, as she helped him oil and sharpen his weapons, she noticed the care with which he handled a particular shield mounted near his sleeping alcove. Unlike his other gear, which bore the practical simplicity of working tools, this shield was decorated with intricate knotwork and bore symbols that spoke of heritage rather than mere function. The metal was older than anything else in the hall, polished to a mirror finish despite its obvious age. "It belonged to my father," Brandr said quietly, noticing her attention, "and his father before him. The last of 3 generations of men who were never quite good enough to live up to their own legends." The unexpected vulnerability in his voice made Helga look up from the sword she was tending. "What do you mean?" Brandr set down the axe he had been. sharpening and moved to the shield, running one scarred finger along its polished surface. My grandfather was the first to carry the name Ironjaw. He earned it by surviving a battle where his actual jaw was broken so badly it had to be rebuilt with metal wire. The pain never left him, but neither did his determination to prove that weakness could be overcome. "That sounds like strength to me," Helga said softly. "Perhaps, but he passed that need to prove himself to my father, who spent his entire life trying to match achievements that grew larger with each telling." Brandr's smile held no warmth. "My father died attempting a raid that any sensible man would have avoided, all because he couldn't bear the thought of being seen as less than his legendary sire." The pattern was clear even before he continued. Helga could see the weight of expectation that had shaped Brandr's entire life, the pressure to be not just strong but stronger, not just feared but legendary. "And now you carry the same burden," she observed. "Now I carry this," he gestured to the shield, "and the knowledge that every choice I make is measured against impossible standards." His ice-blue eyes met hers. "Do you know what it's like to have people expect you to be larger than life, to never show doubt or weakness or simple human feeling?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Helga found herself thinking of her own experiences different in every way from his, yet perhaps not entirely dissimilar. "I know what it's like to have people expect nothing from you," she said carefully. "To be dismissed before you even speak, to have your worth measured by things you cannot control." She paused, then added with quiet honesty, "I think both kinds of expectations can be cages." Something in Brandr's expression shifted, a subtle relaxing of defenses that made him seem more human and less like the walking legend the village believed him to be. "You understand better than most would. Perhaps we both understand what it means to be trapped by other people's ideas of who we should be." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken recognition. Then Brandr moved closer, close enough that she could see the faint scars that crisscrossed his hands and forearms. Without conscious thought, she reached out to trace one particularly prominent mark. "How did you get this one?" "Training accident when I was barely old enough to hold a sword," he replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "My father insisted I learn to fight left-handed after an opponent nearly took my sword arm. The practice blade slipped during a drill." His skin was warm under her fingertips, and she could feel the slight tremor that ran through him at the contact. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an expression that made her heart hammer against her ribs. "Helga," he began, but whatever he might have said was interrupted by Eirik's return. The older warrior entered with an armload of supplies and news that immediately dispelled the intimate atmosphere. "The preparations are nearly complete, but we have a problem," he announced without preamble. "Thorwald the Wise refuses to let us take his best packhorse." "What's his objection?" Brandr asked, though his voice carried irritation at the interruption. "He claims the beast is too valuable to risk on a treasure hunt that might be nothing more than wishful thinking," Eirik replied dryly. "He wants proof that we're not simply chasing shadows before he commits his resources." Helga felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even now, even with the evidence of the ancient map, people doubted the value of anything connected to her family. "What kind of proof would satisfy him?" "The kind we don't have," Eirik admitted. "Unless—" He paused, his sharp eyes moving between Helga and the carefully stored map. "The riddles on those standing stones you mentioned, have you been able to solve any of them?" The question sent Helga's mind racing. She had spent hours studying the cryptic verses that marked each waypoint on the treasure route, but most remained stubbornly opaque. However, there was one, the first riddle, meant to guide travelers to the initial marker that had begun to make sense as her understanding of the ancient language improved. "Possibly," she said slowly. "The first riddle speaks of a stone that drinks the tears of heaven while standing in Earth's embrace. I think it's describing a particular kind of rock formation, something that collects rainwater in a natural basin. And you know where such a formation might be found? Brandr's interest was immediate and intense. There's a place my mother used to take me when I was small, back when the village still tolerated our presence during festivals, Helga said, the memory surfacing with surprising clarity. A standing stone in the old forest, carved with symbols I didn't understand then, but recognize now. It has a natural depression at its base that fills with water during storms. Eirik leaned forward. How far? A half-day's walk, if the paths haven't become too overgrown. Helga felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. But if I'm wrong, if you're wrong, we've lost nothing but time, Brandr said firmly. But if you're right, we'll have the proof Thorwald needs and confirmation that your mother's map is genuine. The prospect of validating her family's legacy sent warmth spreading through Helga's chest. For too long, she had accepted the world's assessment of her worth, or lack thereof. Now, for the first time, she had the opportunity to prove that her bloodline carried knowledge and value that had been dismissed too quickly. We'll leave at first light, Brandr decided. Just the three of us, traveling light. If the stone is where you believe it to be, and if it matches the riddle's description, then we'll know we're on the right path. As they finalized their plans, Helga found herself stealing glances at Brandr when she thought he wasn't looking. The vulnerability he had shown earlier lingered in her mind like warmth from a banked fire. Beneath the legendary warrior lay a man who understood the burden of living up to impossible expectations, someone who might truly understand the weight of the secrets she carried. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She had spent so long being nothing to anyone that the possibility of meaning something to someone like Brandr felt almost too enormous to believe. But as she prepared for sleep that night, the shield on the wall seemed to watch over her like a silent guardian. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to hope that tomorrow might bring answers instead of merely new questions. The journey to the standing stone began before dawn, when the forest still lay wrapped in mist, and the only sounds were their footsteps on the ancient path. Helga led the way with surprising confidence, her childhood memories proving more reliable than she had dared hope. Every twisted tree, every moss-covered boulder, every turn in the overgrown trail felt familiar despite the years that had passed since her last visit. Brandr and Eirik followed in companionable silence, their eyes constantly scanning the forest for signs of danger. Both men moved with the unconscious grace of experienced warriors, their weapons within easy reach despite the peaceful morning. Helga found their presence both comforting and intimidating, a reminder of how far removed her quiet life had been from the world of conflict and adventure. "Tell us about your mother's visits to this place," Brandr said as they paused beside a stream to water their horses. "Were they pilgrimages of some kind?" Helga considered the question while filling her water skin. "She called them remembrances," she replied slowly. "I thought she meant remembering the old stories, honoring the ancestors. But now," she gestured toward the path ahead, "now I wonder if she was maintaining some kind of connection to something more specific." "Family duty," Eirik suggested. Keeping watch over sites that held significance for her bloodline, the possibility sent shivers down Helga's spine. To think that her quiet mother had been secretly tending to the legacy of ancient royalty seemed impossible, yet the evidence continued to mount with each step deeper into the forest. They traveled through increasingly ancient woodland, where the trees grew so thick that sunlight barely penetrated the canopy above. The path became less defined, more suggestion than actual trail, but Helga's memory guided them with growing certainty toward their destination. It was midday when they finally emerged into a circular clearing that felt charged with significance. At its center stood a pillar of black stone that rose nearly twice of Brandr's height, its surface covered with carved symbols that seemed to shift in the dappled sunlight. And there, exactly as the riddle had described, was a natural basin carved into the stone's base, currently filled with crystal-clear water from recent rains. "Mother of Thor, Eric breathed, his usual composure cracking as he stared at the ancient monument. "It's exactly as you described." Helga approached the stone with reverent steps, her heart hammering as she recognized symbol after symbol from her mother's careful teachings. This wasn't just any ancient marker, it was specifically connected to Queen Astrid's time, bearing the royal seals and protective wards that marked sites of particular importance. But it was the small object nestled in an alcove near the stone's peak that made her gasp aloud. Wrapped in oiled leather and secured with bronze wire was something that gleamed like captured starlight in the forest gloom. "There's something hidden up there," she announced, pointing to the alcove. "Something metallic." Brandr was beside the stone in 3 quick strides, his warrior's eye assessing the best approach. "I can reach it," he decided, "but the stone is old, and the handholds might not support my weight." "Let me try," Helga said suddenly. "I'm smaller, lighter. If the holds fail, I won't fall as far." The look Brandr gave her was equal parts admiration and concern. "Are you certain?" Instead of answering with words, Helga began to climb. The carved symbols provided better grip than she had expected, and her childhood spent scrambling over farm walls and rocky hillsides served her well. Within moments, she had reached the alcove and carefully extracted its hidden treasure. What she found took her breath away. The object was a compass, but unlike any navigation tool she had ever seen. Its face was inscribed with the same ancient runes that covered her mother's map, and its needle, instead of pointing north, seemed to quiver with its own internal purpose. Most remarkably, it grew warm in her hands, as if responding to her touch specifically. "It's beautiful," she called down to the others, then began her careful descent. Once safely on the ground, she placed the compass in Brandr's massive hands and watched his expression change from skepticism to wonder. "Feel that," he murmured. "It's responding to something." Eirik leaned in for a closer look. "Those markings, they match the ones on your mother's map exactly. This isn't just any compass. It's specifically designed to work with the route she left you." As if summoned by his words, the compass needle suddenly swung toward the northeast, pointing with unwavering certainty toward a specific direction through the forest. The device grew noticeably warmer as it aligned, as if pleased to finally fulfill its ancient purpose. The next waypoint, Helga realized, it's showing us the way to the second standing stone. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching through the forest. Too many horses, moving with military precision. Brandr's hand went immediately to his warhammer, while Eirik drew his sword with fluid motion. "Magnus's men," Eirik said grimly. "They've tracked us." Through the trees came the unmistakable sounds of armed riders, the clink of mail, the creak of leather, the soft commands of men accustomed to coordinated movement. Helga felt her blood turn to ice as she realized the implications. "They followed us from the village," she whispered. "They know about the stone." "More than that," Brandr replied, his voice hard as winter iron. "They know we found something here." The first riders emerged into the clearing with weapons already drawn, 6 men in mail and leather, bearing the red banner of Magnus Bloodaxe's clan. Their leader, a scarred veteran with cold eyes and greying beard, surveyed the scene with obvious satisfaction. "Brandr Ironjaw," the man called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I am Ragnar Scarface, sworn man to Magnus Bloodaxe. You will surrender whatever you found at this place." "I will do no such thing," Brandr replied calmly, though his grip on his hammer tightened. "You have no authority in these woods. We have the authority of superior numbers and sharp steel," Ragnar shot back. "Magnus Bloodaxe claims dominion over all treasure found in these lands. Stand aside and let us examine what the woman discovered." The way he spoke of her, as if she were merely a tool for finding things others would claim, sent anger flashing through Helga like lightning. She stepped forward, the compass still warm in her hands. "The treasure belongs to those who can solve the riddles that guard it," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Your master is welcome to try." Ragnar's laugh was ugly. "Riddles are for children and scholars. We prefer more direct methods." But as his men began to advance, the compass in Helga's hands suddenly blazed with light, not the warm glow of before, but a brilliant radiance that made every man in the clearing shield his eyes. The ancient symbols carved into the standing stone began to glow with answering fire, and a sound like distant thunder rolled through the forest. When the light faded, Ragnar and his men found themselves facing not just three travelers, but something far more dangerous: the awakening power of Queen Astrid's ancient protections, activated by the rightful heir's touch. "Perhaps," Brandr said softly, his warhammer gleaming in the magical afterglow, "you should reconsider your approach." The magical light faded gradually, leaving the clearing in an uneasy silence, broken only by the nervous snorting of horses and the distant rustle of wind through ancient leaves. Ragnar Scarface and his men had retreated several steps, their weapons still drawn, but their confidence visibly shaken by the display of power they had just witnessed. Helga stared down at the compass in her hands, which had returned to its warm, steady glow. The realization that she had somehow triggered the ancient protections sent both excitement and terror coursing through her veins. Whatever connection she possessed to Queen Astrid's legacy was clearly more than mere bloodline. It was something active, something that could be awakened. "Sorcery," one of Magnus's men muttered, making a protective sign with his free hand. "The woman is a witch." "The woman," Brandr said with deadly calm, "is under my protection, and she has done nothing more than reclaim what rightfully belongs to her bloodline." Ragnar's scarred face twisted into a sneer, though Helga noticed he made no move to advance further. "Bloodline? She's a peasant girl whose family threw her away like spoiled meat. What bloodline could she possibly claim?" Before Brandr could respond, Helga stepped forward. The compass seemed to pulse with encouraging warmth, and she felt a strange confidence flowing through her, as if she were remembering something rather than discovering it for the first time. "I am Helga Astrid's daughter," she declared, her voice carrying across the clearing with unexpected authority. "Daughter of Astrid, daughter of the line of Queen Astrid the Wise, keeper of the ancient treasures and rightful ruler of the united clans." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down before the gods themselves. Even Eirik looked startled by the formal declaration, while Brandr's expression showed a mixture of pride and concern. Ragnar recovered first, though his laugh sounded forced. Pretty words, but they proved nothing. Any desperate woman could claim royal heritage when cornered. "Could any desperate woman do this?" Helga asked, holding the compass high. At her touch, it blazed with renewed light, and the standing stone responded with its own radiant glow. But this time, something more happened. The carved symbols began to shift and rearrange themselves, forming new patterns that told a story in the ancient script. The tale they revealed was breathtaking in its implications. Queen Astrid the Wise had indeed hidden her treasures, but not from common thieves. She had hidden them from a great catastrophe, a war between the clans that would have destroyed everything she had worked to build. The treasures weren't just gold and jewels, but the regalia of true kingship items that could unite the scattered clans under a single banner once more. "The crown of unity," Helga read aloud, her voice growing stronger as the ancient language flowed from her lips with increasing fluency. "The scepter of law, the rings of binding. Together, they grant dominion over all who would follow strength, joined with wisdom." Ragnar's face had gone pale beneath his scars. "Impossible. The treasures of Queen Astrid are legends, nothing more." "Are they?" Brandr asked quietly, his warhammer resting across his shoulders with deceptive casualness. "Because it seems to me that your master has been very interested in legends lately. Why else would he send armed men to follow us through the forest?" The truth of it was written across Ragnar's features. Magnus Bloodaxe knew exactly what they were seeking, and he wanted it badly enough to risk open conflict with Brandr Ironjaw. The question was, how he had learned of the treasure's existence in the first place. Someone told him, Helga realized aloud. Someone in the village saw the map, heard our discussions, or someone much closer than that, Eirik said grimly. His sword remained at ready, and his eyes never left the mounted warriors surrounding them. Information like this doesn't spread by accident. The implication hung heavy in the air. If Magnus had detailed knowledge of their quest, it meant someone in their inner circle had betrayed them. But who and why? Before anyone could voice their suspicions, the forest erupted with movement. More riders crashed through the undergrowth, these bearing different banners and wearing different colors. The newcomers were Magnus's men, but they weren't attacking, they were fleeing. Ambush, one of them shouted as he galloped past. Foreign ships in the harbor, the Danes have come. Ragnar's expression changed from confidence to alarm in an instant. How many ships? At least a dozen. Flying the Raven banner, the messenger called back without slowing. Magnus orders all men back to defend the stronghold. The standoff in the clearing dissolved as quickly as morning mist. Ragnar and his men wheeled their horses around and thundered back through the forest, leaving only churned earth and broken branches to mark their passage. In the sudden quiet that followed, Helga found herself trembling with reaction. The compass in her hands had dimmed to its previous gentle glow, but she could still feel the power that had flowed through her alien yet familiar, like recalling a half-forgotten dream. Danish raiders, Eirik said thoughtfully. That changes everything. If they're attacking Magnus's stronghold, then Magnus will be too busy defending his own territory to worry about ancient treasures. Brandr finished, at least for now. Helga looked between the two warriors, seeing the calculating expressions on their faces. This is our chance, isn't it? While Magnus is distracted, we can follow the compass to the next waypoint. It's also our chance to return safely to the village, Brandr pointed out gently. No one would blame you for choosing the safer path. The offer was genuine, and part of Helga was tempted to accept it. The display of magical power had shaken her almost as much as it had frightened Magnus's men. Whatever forces she was awakening, they were far beyond her understanding or control. But as she looked at the ancient standing stone, its carved surface now returned to normal weathered granite, she felt the weight of generations pressing upon her shoulders. Her mother had died protecting the secret of Queen Astrid's legacy. How many others had made similar sacrifices to preserve the knowledge until someone worthy could claim it? The next stone, she said finally. The compass will guide us there. We continue. Brandr's smile was equal parts admiration and concern. The path ahead will only grow more dangerous. I know, Helga replied, tucking the compass safely inside her cloak. But some things are worth the risk. As they prepared to leave the clearing, she caught sight of something that made her breath catch in her throat. Partially hidden behind the standing stone was another object, a circlet of tarnished silver bearing the royal seal of Queen Astrid's house, the forgotten crown. Just as her vision during the magical display had suggested, the ancient queen had left markers of her passage for those who would follow. Each waypoint would reveal not just the path forward, but pieces of the royal regalia itself. Helga lifted the circlet with reverent hands, feeling its weight both physical and symbolic. When she placed it on her head, it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting centuries for her specifically. "My lady," Brandr said quietly, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before: recognition, respect, perhaps even awe. For the first time in her life, Helga felt truly worthy of the title. The compass led them deeper into the ancient forest, through valleys that seemed untouched by time, and over ridges where standing stones marked boundaries older than memory. With each mile traveled, Helga felt the crown's weight becoming less foreign, as if it were awakening something within her that had always been there, waiting. They made camp that evening beside a stream whose waters reflected the last light of day like liquid silver. The Danish raids had provided them with unexpected breathing room, But all three travelers understood that Magnus's distraction would be temporary. Soon enough, the attention would return to the treasure that could reshape the balance of power among the clans. "Tell us about the next waypoint," Brandr requested as they shared a simple meal of dried meat and hard bread. "What does the map say we should expect to find?" Helga spread the ancient parchment carefully on her cloak, weighing down the corners with smooth stones from the stream. The compass lay beside it, its steady glow providing just enough light to make out the intricate markings. "The second riddle speaks of the hall where memories sleep," she read, tracing the symbols with one finger. "It mentions a guardian who tests the worth of those who would wake the ancient knowledge." "A guardian," Eirik mused. "Human or otherwise?" "The text isn't clear," Helga admitted. "It could be either, or both." As she studied the map more closely, something caught her attention that she had missed before. Near the edge of the parchment, in handwriting that was definitely more recent than the original text, someone had added a note in the common script. "Brandr," she said slowly, her voice tight with sudden tension. "Look at this." The note was brief, but its implications were staggering. The bloodline confirmed. The seal responds, "She is the true heir, E.R. Eirik Ravenson." The initials matched perfectly. The silence that followed was profound and dangerous. Brandr's eyes moved from the note to his oldest friend, while Helga felt the world shifting beneath her feet, like ground giving way in an avalanche. "Eirik." Brandr's voice was carefully controlled, but Helga could hear the hurt underneath. "What is this?" The older warrior's face had gone carefully blank, all expression wiped away, as if he were preparing for battle. "It's what it appears to be," he said finally. "Confirmation that your suspicions were correct from the beginning. You've been in contact with Magnus. It wasn't a question." "I've been protecting you," Eirik replied firmly. "Both of you." Magnus suspected something significant was happening, but he didn't know what. "I provided just enough information to keep him from taking more aggressive action." Brandr was on his feet in one fluid motion, his hand moving instinctively toward his warhammer. "You betrayed us." "I saved us," Eirik shot back, rising to face his oldest friend. "Do you think Magnus would have sent only 6 men if he knew the full truth? Do you think he would have been content with threats and posturing if he understood what she really carries?" He gestured toward Helga. "I told him just enough to satisfy his curiosity while keeping the real secrets safe." The explanation had the ring of truth, but it did nothing to ease the tension crackling between the two men. Helga found herself caught between them, the crown on her head suddenly feeling heavier than stone. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. Eirik's gaze shifted to her, and she saw something like regret in his weathered features. "I suspected from the moment Brandr claimed you. He doesn't make impulsive decisions, and there was something about the way he looked at you, as if he saw something the rest of us missed. And the note on the map? I added that after I saw how the compass responded to your touch," he admitted. "The royal artifacts only activate for those of true bloodline. When it blazed with light at your command, I knew for certain what you were." Brandr's expression was thunderous. "You should have told us. When? When would have been the right time to reveal that I've been playing a dangerous game with Magnus Bloodaxe's trust?" Eirik's voice rose with frustration. "When would have been the perfect moment to explain that I've been feeding him partial truths to prevent him from mounting a full assault on our village?" "The moment you realized what we were truly dealing with," Brandr replied coldly. "And risk everything if you decided the danger was too great? Risk losing the chance to restore the rightful queen to her throne because you were too protective to see the larger picture?" The words hung in the air like weapons drawn but not yet struck. Helga could see the decades of friendship straining under the weight of secrets and conflicting loyalties, and she realized that something precious was about to shatter irreparably. "Stop," she said firmly, rising to her feet. The crown caught the compass light, and for a moment she looked every inch the royal heir she was slowly learning to be. "Both of you, stop this before you say things that cannot be taken back." Both warriors turned to her, and she saw her reflection in their eyes, no longer the abandoned woman they had found in the village square, but someone who commanded respect and attention by right of birth and growing power. "Eric," she continued, her voice carrying new authority, "you were right to protect the secret, but wrong to keep us in darkness. Trust requires honesty, even when the truth is difficult." The older warrior bowed his head slightly. "My lady, Brandr," she turned to the giant warrior whose claim had saved her from despair. "Eric's loyalty has always been to you, even when his methods seemed questionable. Judge his intentions, not just his actions." Brandr's grip on his hammer relaxed fractionally, though his expression remained troubled. "Intentions matter little if the methods put everything at risk." "Perhaps," Helga agreed, "but we cannot change what has already been done. We can only decide how to move forward." She moved to the map, studying the route that would take them to the next waypoint. "The question now is whether Magnus will be satisfied with the information he has, or whether he will demand more." "He'll demand more," Eric said quietly. "He always does. The Danish raids bought us time, but not much. When his stronghold is secure, his attention will return to the treasure." "Then we need to reach it first," Brandr said grimly. "All of it. If the regalia truly exists, if it can unite the clans under legitimate rule, then leaving it hidden serves no one." Helga felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders once again, but this time it felt less like a burden and more like accepting her proper place in the world. "There's something else," she said slowly, studying a portion of the map she hadn't examined closely before. "The final location, it's not just a treasure vault. According to this, it's a hall built into the living rock of the mountain, designed to test those who would claim the crown." "What kind of tests?" Eric asked. "Trials of wisdom, courage, and worthiness," Helga read. "The ancient queen built safeguards to ensure that her regalia would only pass to someone capable of wielding its power responsibly." Brandr nodded thoughtfully. "Then we face not just Magnus and his warriors, but the judgment of the ancients themselves." As they prepared to settle for the night, Helga found herself touching the casson medallion she wore beneath her clothing, a simple piece of silver carved with her family's protective runes. Her mother had given it to her years ago, claiming it had been passed down through generations of women in their line. But now, studying it more closely in the compass light, she realized it bore markings that matched the royal seals on both the map and the crown. It wasn't just a family heirloom, it was proof of lineage, a tangible link to Queen Astrid's bloodline that her mother had preserved in secret. The medallion grew warm against her skin, and she understood with crystalline clarity that her heritage was more than mere accident of birth. She carried within her the accumulated wisdom and power of generations of rulers, waiting to be awakened by worthy purpose. Tomorrow, they would face whatever trials lay ahead, but tonight, for the first time in her life, Helga truly understood who she was meant to be. Dawn broke grey and cold over the mountain peaks that marked their destination. The compass had guided them through the night to a narrow valley, where ancient stones formed a natural amphitheatre around what appeared to be the entrance to a vast underground hall. The sight took Helga's breath away. This was clearly the work of master craftsmen from an age when the clans possessed knowledge and resources that had long since been lost. But it was the signs of recent activity that set all three travelers on edge. Fresh horse tracks marked the soft earth, and the remains of several campfires suggested that Magnus's forces had been here recently, in numbers far greater than the small group they had encountered at the first waypoint. "They've found it?" Brandr said grimly, studying the scattered evidence of the enemy's presence. "But they haven't gone inside." "Why not?" Helga asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Eric pointed to a series of bodies arranged respectfully near the entrance, Magnus's men, by their clothing and weapons, but showing no obvious signs of violence. "The Guardian trials. The ancient protections are still active." The implications were sobering. If Magnus had lost experienced warriors simply trying to enter the treasure hall, what chance did they have of surviving the tests that awaited within? But as Helga approached the entrance, the medallion beneath her clothing grew warm against her skin. The carved stone archway that led into the mountain depths was covered with the same royal symbols that marked her heritage, and she could feel them responding to her presence like old friends, recognizing a long-absent family member. The trials aren't meant to kill, she realized aloud, her understanding growing as she studied the intricate carvings. They're meant to test. Magnus's men died because they tried to force their way past safeguards that can only be overcome through legitimate claim. "And you have that claim," Brandr said, moving to stand beside her. His presence was solid and reassuring, a bulwark against the doubts that threatened to overwhelm her. "I hope so," she replied honestly, "but hope isn't the same as certainty." Before anyone could respond, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley. Many horses, moving with the disciplined precision of a military formation. Magnus Bloodaxe had returned, and this time he hadn't come with a mere scouting party. "How many?" Eirik asked, his hand moving instinctively to his sword hilt. Brandr's experienced eye counted the dust clouds rising beyond the valley's rim. 24, at least, maybe more. The odds were impossible. Even Brandr Ironjaw couldn't stand against such numbers in open combat. Their only hope lay in reaching the treasure before Magnus could stop them, then using whatever power the royal regalia possessed to level the playing field. "The entrance," Helga said urgently. "We need to get inside before they arrive." But as they approached the carved archway, a figure stepped. From the shadows within, tall, powerfully built, bearing the scars and bearing of a veteran warrior, Magnus Bloodaxe himself had been waiting for them. "Brandr Ironjaw," Magnus called out, his voice carrying easily across the stone amphitheater. "I wondered when you would finally arrive." The clan chief was exactly what Helga had expected, a man who radiated dangerous competence, whose every movement suggested violence held carefully in check. His armor was practical rather than ornate, his weapons clearly designed for use rather than display. This was a warrior who had earned his reputation through deeds rather than boasts. "Magnus?" Brandr replied evenly, his warhammer sliding into his hands with practiced ease. "I should have expected you to claim the best seat for the performance." "The performance is over," Magnus said firmly. "You've led me to what I sought, and now it's time to discuss terms." "What terms?" Helga stepped forward, the crown catching the morning light as she moved. "You have no claim here beyond force of arms." Magnus's gaze fixed on her with sudden intensity, taking in the royal circlet and the way the ancient stones seemed to respond to her presence. "So it's true," he said slowly. "You really are what Eirik claimed, the last heir of Queen Astrid's line." The confirmation that Eirik had indeed been feeding Magnus information sent a chill through the group. But there was no time to address it now. More riders were cresting the valley rim, their weapons glinting in the pale sunlight. "I am," Helga replied with growing confidence. "And I claim my inheritance by right of blood and trial." "Rights mean nothing without the power to enforce them," Magnus replied. "You may be Queen Astrid's heir, but I command 50 warriors and hold 3 strongholds. Which of us do you think the clans will follow?" It was a fair question, and one that struck at the heart of Helga's deepest fears. Royal blood might grant her legitimate claim to the ancient treasures, but it wouldn't automatically translate to political power in their harsh world. But as she considered Magnus's challenge, something unexpected happened. The medallion against her chest grew not just warm but hot, and the stone archway behind her began to glow with the same light that had blazed from the compass and standing stones. "Perhaps," she said slowly, understanding dawning, "they'll follow the one who can command the ancient magics as well as the ancient bloodline." Magnus's expression tightened. "Parlor tricks and light shows won't win battles." "Won't they?" Helga asked, raising her hand toward the glowing archway. At her gesture, the light intensified, and something stirred within the mountain depths, the sound of massive mechanisms awakening after centuries of slumber. The treasure hall that Queen Astrid had built wasn't just a vault. It was a fortress, designed to protect its contents and test those who sought them. And it was responding to Helga's presence like a weapon, recognizing its rightful wielder. "The trials await," she announced, her voice carrying new authority. "Let any who would claim the crown of the united clans enter and prove their worth." Magnus's laugh was harsh. "You think I'll follow you into some ancient trap? I've already lost good men to whatever sorcery guards that place." "Then you forfeit your claim," Helga replied simply. "The crown passes to those brave enough to face the tests." For a moment, Magnus seemed genuinely uncertain. His eyes moved from the glowing archway to his assembled warriors, clearly weighing his options. The smart, tactical choice would be to wait outside and take the treasure from whoever emerged successful. But the political implications of appearing to back down from a direct challenge were equally important to consider. "Very well," he said finally, "but we go together. If the trials are meant to determine the rightful ruler, then let them judge us both." Brandr stepped forward immediately. "If Helga goes, I go with her." "And I," Eric added, moving to flank them. "Whatever mistakes I've made, my loyalty is clear now." Magnus nodded curtly. "Fair enough. But understand, once we enter that place, whatever happens inside determines everything. The winner takes not just the treasure, but the right to rule." As they approached the entrance, Helga felt the weight of generations pressing upon her shoulders. Every queen who had come before, every sacrifice made to preserve the bloodline, every secret kept and price paid, all of it led to this moment. The archway responded to her touch like a door recognizing an old key. Ancient mechanisms rumbled to life, and passages that had been sealed for generations opened to reveal corridors carved from living rock and lined with precious metals. The air that flowed out carried the scent of antiquity and power. But it was what lay just beyond the threshold that made her breath catch in her throat. Suspended in a frame of carved silver and glowing with its own inner light was a pair of ancient gauntlets, perfectly preserved, beautifully crafted, and radiating the same energy that had awakened in response to her presence. "The Guardian's Gauntlet," she whispered, recognizing the artifacts from her mother's most precious stories. "The ancient protectors that allow safe handling of the royal treasures." As she lifted them from their resting place, the gauntlets molded themselves to her hands as if they had been waiting centuries for her touch. Power flowed through them and into her, connecting her not just to Queen Astrid's legacy, but to the fundamental forces that had shaped their world. Behind them, Magnus's warriors filled the archway, their weapons ready, but their faces uncertain. None of them had expected to witness the awakening of ancient magics or the transformation of a discarded peasant woman into something approaching divine royalty. "The trials begin," Helga announced, her voice echoing through chambers that had not heard human speech for generations. "Let those who would rule prove their worth to the ancestors and the gods." As they moved deeper into the mountain, following passages that seemed to stretch on forever, she felt Brandr's presence beside her like a shield against doubt. Whatever lay ahead, whatever tests the ancient queen had devised, she would not face them alone. The true treasure hunt was about to begin. The first trial chamber opened before them like the throat of some enormous beast, its walls carved with scenes of ancient battles and crowned figures. In the center of the room stood a pedestal of black stone, and upon it rested an object that made every person present draw breath in wonder. The queen's scepter lay before them, its silver shaft crowned with a crystal that pulsed with inner fire. Even from a distance, Helga could feel its power calling to her, recognizing something in her blood that marked her as its rightful inheritor. But between them and the scepter lay a challenge that would test more than mere royal heritage. The floor of the chamber was a maze of precious stones, each one carved with different symbols. A mistake would trigger ancient defenses that had already claimed the lives of Magnus's scouts. The riddle of worthiness, Helga read from inscriptions that glowed along the walls. Let those who would rule show wisdom before strength, mercy before judgment, sacrifice before gain. Magnus studied the pattern of stones with a warrior's tactical eye. It's a puzzle. Step on the wrong sequence and... His words were cut short as one of his men, eager to prove his worth, leaped onto the nearest stone. Ancient mechanisms responded instantly, sending poisoned darts whistling through the air. The warrior fell without a sound. The path must be chosen carefully, Brandr observed, his hand resting on Helga's shoulder. This isn't a test that can be conquered through force. Helga stepped forward, the guardian's gauntlet warm on her hands. As she approached the edge of the maze, the symbols on the stones began to shift and glow, responding to her presence. Slowly, a pattern emerged, not random markings, but words in the ancient script. Wisdom, she read, identifying the first stone. Then mercy. Then sacrifice. She looked back at the others. The path isn't about solving a puzzle, it's about demonstrating the virtues of true leadership, Magnus scoffed. Pretty words won't help if you choose wrong. Then you're welcome to try first, Helga replied calmly. The clan chief's face darkened, but he made no move toward the stones. Whatever else his faults, Magnus was too experienced a warrior to rush blindly into obvious danger. Helga took a deep breath and stepped onto the first stone. Wisdom. It held firm beneath her weight, glowing brighter as if pleased by her choice. The next step, mercy accepted her just as readily. One by one, she made her way across the chamber, each stone confirming her understanding of what it meant to rule justly. But it was the final stone that gave her pause. Sacrifice. The word seemed to pulse with meaning as she approached it, and she realized this wasn't just about reaching the scepter. It was about proving she understood the true cost of leadership. The greatest rulers are those who give the most, she said aloud, thinking of her mother's quiet sacrifices, of Brandr's protective claim, of all the people who had shaped her understanding of what it meant to care for others. With absolute certainty, she stepped onto the final stone. The scepter blazed with welcome light as she lifted it from its resting place. Power flowed through the guardian's gauntlet and into her very bones, connecting her to the ancient magics that had once united the clans under a single banner. For the first time in her life, she felt truly complete. But their victory was interrupted by the sound of running feet in the corridor behind them. More of Magnus's warriors burst into the chamber, their faces grim with news. "The Danes," one of them gasped. "They've broken through the coastal defenses. 3 settlements have fallen, and they're moving inland." Magnus's face went pale. "My stronghold? Under siege." The messengers barely escaped with their lives. The news struck everyone present like a physical blow. While they had been competing for ancient treasures, a very real and immediate threat had been ravaging their lands. The irony was bitter. What good was claiming the right to rule if there was nothing left to govern? "We have to go back," Magnus said immediately. "My people need defending." "With what?" Brandr asked pointedly. "You brought most of your warriors here. By the time you return, the battle will be decided one way or another." Helga felt the weight of the scepter in her hands, its power flowing through her like liquid fire. An idea was forming, dangerous, unprecedented, but possibly their only hope. "Unless we don't go back as separate forces," she said slowly, "unless we return as a united army under a single banner." Magnus stared at her. "You're suggesting..." "I'm suggesting that Queen Astrid's vision was more than just pretty idealism," Helga replied, raising the scepter so its light filled the chamber. "The clans were strongest when they fought together. The Danish threat proves that division makes us all vulnerable. And you think ancient magic will be enough to turn the tide?" Magnus's voice held skepticism, but also a note of desperate hope. "I think," Helga said firmly, that we're about to find out what the royal regalia was truly designed to accomplish. The scepter pulsed in her hands, and she felt the presence of every ruler who had come before her, their wisdom and strength flowing into this moment of decision. The real battle was about to begin. The final chamber lay beyond a passage that seemed to stretch into the heart of the mountain itself. Here, ancient magic had carved a throne room from living rock, with pillars that soared into darkness and walls that gleamed with veins of precious metal. At the chamber's heart sat a throne of white stone, and floating above it, suspended in a column of silver light, was the Unity Crown. Unlike the simple circlet Helga had found at the first waypoint, this was clearly a crown meant for emperors. Its golden surface was inlaid with gems that caught the magical light and threw it back in patterns that seemed to shift and move with their own intelligence. But it was the power radiating from the artifact that took her breath away. This wasn't just a symbol of authority, but a tool that could bind minds and hearts to a common cause. The crown of Queen Astrid the Wise. Magnus breathed, his earlier skepticism forgotten in the face of such obvious majesty. The stories said it could command the loyalty of any warrior who looked upon it. Not command, Helga corrected, understanding flowing through her as the scepter in her hands resonated with the crown above. Inspire. There's a difference between forcing obedience and earning true loyalty. But before anyone could move toward the throne, the chamber filled with new arrivals. Magnus's remaining warriors flooded through the entrance, their weapons drawn and their faces grim with desperate purpose. "My lord," their leader called out, "Ragnar Scarface has returned. The Danish fleet numbers 30 ships, and they're not just raiding, they're conquering. Everything south of the great river has fallen." The news struck the chamber like a thunderbolt. 30 ships meant thousands of warriors, a force large enough to overwhelm any individual clan's defenses. The scattered settlements of their homeland stood no chance unless they could unite under a single banner. "The crown," Magnus said urgently, his gaze fixed on the floating artifact. "If it truly carries the power of unity." "It does," Helga replied. But her attention was focused on something else entirely. Carved into the base of the throne were symbols that matched those on her heritage medallion, but arranged in a pattern she had never seen before. As she approached, the symbols began to glow in sequence, revealing their meaning. A final test, she realized aloud. The crown doesn't simply grant power to whoever claims it. It requires a binding oath from the ruler to the ruled, a promise to serve rather than to command. Magnus's expression darkened. What manner of oath? Helga studied the glowing symbols, her understanding of the ancient script now flowing as naturally as breathing. To rule with wisdom over strength, to protect the weak rather than exploit them, to unite the clans not through conquest but through justice. She looked up at Magnus. To sacrifice personal ambition for the greater good. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone present understood the implications. The crown would grant immense power, but only to someone willing to bind themselves with chains of responsibility that could never be broken. "And if the oath is refused?" Brandr asked quietly. "Then the crown remains where it is, and the clans remain divided," Helga replied. "And the Danes complete their conquest while we argue over who deserves to rule the Ashes." Magnus stepped forward, his scarred face showing the weight of decision. "I've spent my life building power through strength and fear," he said slowly. "I've taken what I wanted and held it through force." He paused, studying the crown with new understanding. "But power gained that way dies with the man who wields it. True strength comes from knowing when to yield it." Helga agreed softly. To everyone's surprise, Magnus knelt before the throne, not to Helga, but to the principle she represented. "I have no claim to ancient bloodlines or royal heritage," he said formally, "but I swear by my sword and my honor to follow the rightful queen, if she will accept the crown's binding. One by one, his warriors followed their leader's example, kneeling in acknowledgement of something greater than mere personal loyalty. Even Eirik and Brandr knelt, though their loyalty had never been in question. Helga approached the throne with steps that felt weighted by destiny. The scepter in her hand grew warm as she placed her other palm on the glowing symbols, speaking the words that appeared in her mind as if she had always known them. "I swear to rule with wisdom, to protect the innocent, to unite rather than divide, and to sacrifice my own desires for the good of all who look to me for leadership." The words rang through the chamber with the force of binding magic. "I accept the burden of the crown and all that comes with it." The unity crown descended slowly into her waiting hands, its touch sending power coursing through her entire being. But more than magical energy, she felt the weight of connection. Every person in the chamber, every clan member who would follow her, every life that would depend on her choices. When she placed the crown upon her head, light blazed from every surface in the chamber, and in that moment she truly became Queen Helga I, ruler of the united clans. But even as power settled into her bones like coming home, the urgency of the Danish threat remained. The crown had given her the authority to command, but it would be up to her wisdom and the courage of those who followed her to save their homeland. The real test of her reign was about to begin. The return journey to the coast took on the character of a royal procession, though one driven by desperate urgency rather than ceremony. Word of Queen Helga's coronation spread like wildfire through the scattered settlements, carried by riders who bore the ancient royal seal and spoke of the unity crown's return. By the time they reached the great valley that led to the sea, their small band had swollen into an army of unprecedented size. Warriors who had spent generations feuding with their neighbors now rode side by side under the royal banner. Farmers and fishermen took up weapons beside seasoned raiders, all bound together by the crown's power and the desperate need to defend their homeland. The sight of such unity would have been impossible to imagine mere weeks ago. But it was the change in Helga herself that truly marked how far they had all traveled. Gone was the uncertain woman who had clutched a mysterious bundle in the village square. In her place rode a queen who commanded not through fear, but through the kind of quiet authority that made strong men glad to follow her lead. "The Danish camp lies just beyond that ridge," Eirik reported, as they crested the final hill before the coast. "Their ships are beached in the Great Bay, and they've built earthworks to protect their landing site." Helga studied the enemy position with eyes that had grown accustomed to tactical thinking. The crown on her head seemed to enhance not just her magical abilities, but her understanding of strategy and leadership. "How many?" "Perhaps 3,000, based on the ship count," Brandr replied grimly. "We have numbers, but they have discipline and experience." "They also have no idea what they're truly facing," Magnus added, with the first genuine smile he had shown in days. "They came expecting to conquer scattered clans. They won't be prepared for a unified army led by someone who commands ancient magic." The truth of it became apparent as they descended toward the coast. The Danish raiders had indeed prepared for conventional warfare against divided enemies. Their camp was well fortified, but positioned to defend against attacks from multiple directions, not against a single, coordinated assault. As the sun reached its zenith, Queen Helga raised the scepter high above her head and spoke words that carried across the valley with supernatural clarity. "Warriors of the united clans," her voice reached every ear despite the distance. "Today we fight not for individual glory or clan honor, but for the right of our people to remain free in the land of our ancestors." The response was thunderous, thousands of voices raised in agreement, weapons lifted toward the sky, the sound of absolute unity that had not been heard in these lands for generations. The battle itself was swift and decisive. The Danish raiders, for all their skill and experience, simply could not match the coordination and fervor of an army that fought as one mind guided by one will. When Queen Helga appeared on the battlefield, the unity crown blazing with inner light and the scepter directing the flow of combat, even the most hardened invaders began to understand they faced something beyond mere mortal opposition. The magical artifacts didn't grant victory through supernatural power alone, but rather through their ability to coordinate and inspire. Every warrior knew where he was needed most. Every commander understood how his actions fit into the larger strategy. Every person in the army felt connected to something greater than themselves. By sunset, the Danish fleet was retreating toward open water, their dreams of conquest shattered against the reality of a truly united enemy. The bay that had seen foreign ships unloading invaders now witnessed the crown's first great triumph. In the months that followed, the transformation continued. The marriage braid ceremony that bound Queen Helga and Brandr Ironjaw took place in the great hall of the old capital, restored now to its ancient glory. The simple cords woven with threads of gold and silver represented more than the union of two people. They symbolized the binding of strength and wisdom, the marriage of protective power with nurturing leadership. "Do you remember?" Brandr asked as they stood together on the restored palace balcony, watching the sun set over lands now prosperous and peaceful. "What you said that first night in my hall, about feeling like a burden no one wanted?" Helga smiled, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, where new life grew, the future heir to a united kingdom. "I remember feeling like I had no value, no purpose worth protecting. And now?" She looked out over the valley, where former enemies worked side by side to rebuild what war had damaged, where children played without fear of raiders, where the ancient dream of unity had finally been realized. "Now I understand that sometimes what the world calls worthless is simply waiting for the right moment to reveal its true value." The crown rested lightly on her head now, its weight familiar and comfortable. The scepter stood ready at her side, and the other royal artifacts of her heritage waited in the treasury for the next generation to inherit. But it was the medallion at her throat, her mother's simple gift, that had started it all, that she treasured most. Winter came and went in peace. Spring brought new growth, new hope, new possibilities that extended far beyond the borders of their small kingdom. Trade routes reopened, alliances formed with distant lands, and scholars came from across the known world to study the restoration of Queen Astrid's legacy. But perhaps the greatest testament to the transformation was a simple scene that played out each evening in the royal hall. Queen Helga, powerful ruler of the united clans, would set aside her crown and scepter to tend to the common needs of her people, settling disputes, hearing petitions, offering counsel to anyone who sought it. She had learned the most important lesson of all. True power lay not in commanding others, but in serving them. The abandoned woman who had once clutched a mysterious bundle while facing exile had become a queen who understood that leadership meant carrying the burdens of others, not adding to them. And, in the quiet moments between royal duties, when she sat with Brandr planning for the child's future, she sometimes thought about that bitter morning in the village square. The family who had cast her out had inadvertently set in motion the very events that saved their homeland. Sometimes the people who love you most truly do abandon you, but sometimes that abandonment leads you exactly where you were always meant to be.